I'm going to approach this topic, which is not directly in my area of expertise, by thinking about why it's so hard to inform people about this entire subject area. I'm sure many of you have experienced that very difficulty. Okay, in a sense, this topic is what I would call the ultimate conspiracy theory. We know that the term conspiracy theory was put into circulation by the United States Central Intelligence Agency, which in the mid-1960s sent a memo to its Operation Mockingbird assets. These were CIA-paid journalistic assets. And that memo said, please discredit anyone who's questioning the official story of the John F. Kennedy assassination by calling them conspiracy theorists. That's where the term comes from. It was launched by the CIA. And we have documentary proof that memo has been discovered and made public. I wonder if a similar program has put into circulation the image of the tinfoil hat. That's the term that gets applied to anyone seeking the truth about any of the taboo topics, the most important topics in the world today. If you look for the truth about 9/11, as I have, and was forced out of the American university system for doing so, you are called a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. If you look for the truth about the questions about supposed suppression of evidence of UFOs, you're called a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. In fact, even if you questioned whether Saddam Hussein really had weapons of mass destruction in 2003, you would have been called a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. This image has become central to the way that the propagandists try to suppress important information in a wide variety of subject areas, which means that maybe there's something very important about the topic that we're all here to discuss. Here we have a cat in a tinfoil hat. It's not the Dr. Seuss cat in the hat, it's a different cat in the hat. Now, I heard from a friend of mine with experience in CIA covert operations. He's the editor at Veterans Today, Gordon Duff. He told me a story about one of the ways that intelligence professionals discredit people that they want to silence or marginalize. He said, we will land a black helicopter on your lawn. Two guys in ninja masks will get out and kick in your door, burst into your living room, grab your cat, run back to their helicopter, get in, and fly away with your cat. Okay? So why would you do that? Well, because now what are you going to do? If you tell anybody, these guys in the black helicopter came and kicked in my door and stole my cat, that's the last time anybody's ever going to take it seriously. Okay? So, turns out that gaslighting is a term that's widely used because psychologists see this all the time in ordinary human behavior, not even professional controllers and covert operators, but just ordinary psychopaths and manipulative people use this all the time. It comes from a Hollywood film, Gaslight, and it refers to making a person question their own reality. That is to say things that make it sound like that person didn't remember something correctly, undermining a person's sense of reality through these kinds of tricks, sort of like the cat kidnapping trick. And apparently this is quite a big topic in psychology, and yet it hasn't really, nobody's made that next step to realizing that what many people at this conference have experienced is a variety of this. It's a kind of catch-22. If you reveal that I'm the one driving you crazy, you're crazy, right? It creates a paradox in the victim. So it's a very disempowering thing. And we can certainly suspect that this is a very common approach in political dirty tricks, intelligence agency dirty tricks, And then we would ask ourselves, would the people who manipulate power want to develop these techniques, perhaps using technology, to enhance their power? Well, of course they would. It's unfortunate, but people who are seeking power are often unethical. That's not news, is it? In the United States, we have a problem with trying to get to the truth about so many of these issues. It's a kind of a religious problem, ultimately. That is, as David Ray Griffin has pointed out, citing John Cobb in Griffin's book, 9/11 and Nationalist Faith, in the United States today, it's hard to inform the public about the fact that we had a coup d'etat on September 11, 2001, largely because the American people have a kind of a substitute religion, a kind of idolatry, really, in which they worship their leaders and their political system in such a way as to, they'll admit that our leaders make terrible mistakes. There are unintended consequences. For example, all these refugees coming to the doors of Europe, that's an unintended consequence of American wars that have destroyed Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Our leaders wouldn't do that intentionally, because we have this religious faith in our leaders that they're basically well-intentioned. They would never do anything really evil. And I would argue that another kind of idolatry that prevents people from getting to the truth about topics like electronic harassment is a kind of idolatry of technology. That is, holding technology and technological progress up as a sort of a false god. And we can't really question the basic thrust towards progress, the basic benevolence of technology. And here's the way the official credo of techno-worship is often expressed. Look, technology is another word for tool. There was a time when nails were high-tech. There was a time when people had to be told how to use a telephone. We got past that. Technology is just a tool. People use tools to improve their lives. Well, yeah, sure, that's true as far as it goes. Technology can be used for good or for ill. That's a truism, in fact. But if we stop there, what we see is that this kind of statement is a disguised way of saying that there are not deep-seated inherent problems with technology in general, or with certain kinds of technologies. That is, technology couldn't be ushering us into a satanic dystopia, could it? We can't even think that. There are, of course, heretics who have questioned the benevolence of technology and specific kinds of technologies. Albert Einstein is one such heretic. He said, "I fear today that technology will surpass our human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots." And when I look at social media and people holding up cell phones to their brains, cooking their brains all the time, I look around me at Walmart in the USA, or big shopping malls, and I wonder whether Einstein wasn't absolutely right about that. One of my favorite references in this subject of exploring this idolatry of technology is David Skrbina, a professor at the University of Michigan. I had him on my radio show not too long ago, and this was the blog entry, the radio show listing. His book, The Metaphysics of Technology, explores the history of critiques of technology and, of course, responses by the pro-technology faction. And he points out that there is a long and responsible line of critique of technology that questions the very essence of technology and whether it really is under human control. The most famous statement of the point of view that technologies actually are controlling us, we're not controlling them, is from Henry David Thoreau, the American transcendentalist writer and mystic, who said that the railroad, this is when the railroad was first arriving in the United States, he said, "We don't ride the railroad rides us." He also said that there's no point in getting on a railroad train, because who needs to get anywhere that you need to get to any faster than you can walk? It's not worth getting to in the first place. So he was a bit of a Luddite and a techno-skeptic. Today, though, you don't have to be an extremist like Thoreau to see that there are some terrible problems with the directions that technology is leading us, especially in the kind of areas that we're talking about at this conference. Here we have Zbigniew Brzezinski. He's about 100 years old now, and he's still controlling the world. Why do we have two 100-year-old Americans, Brzezinski and David Rockefeller, and Henry Kissinger, actually three of them, let's throw in Henry Kissinger, still controlling the world? Well, I guess technology has brought us to this geriatric age where 100-year-old manipulators will rule us. Brzezinski predicted back in the 1960s that the technotronic era involved between the gradual appearance of a more controlled society was upon us already in the 1960s. That was in from his book, Between Two Ages. And everything we're seeing suggests that he not only was right, but in fact that his book was taken not as a warning, as it should have been taken, the way we take Huxley and Orwell and other dystopian writers, but as a kind of a program, a step-by-step program to enslave humanity by these people who apparently think that that's a good thing. The intellectual elite has become a kind of technocratic priesthood, an intermediary between the god of technology, this golden calf, this idol, and humanity. And so we have a hard time imagining that this priesthood could possibly not have our best interests at heart. Sure, it could make mistakes, but surely they're well-intentioned. They certainly wouldn't do anything really terrible, would they? They wouldn't allow anything really terrible to go on, would they? And this is not something that conspiracy theorists, quote-unquote, are making up. The people behind this are quite open about it. This is a famous quote from David Rockefeller. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite, that's a technocratic elite, and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries. And he could have added, and the personal auto-determination practiced in past centuries. So this religion of technology has a lot in common with religions in general. Maybe especially Christianity, because this is all coming out of a post-Christian culture, right? This religion of technology longs for a new creation, a whole new world to replace the flawed, fallen world of nature. And this is a deeply Christian idea. It comes from St. Augustine, and then it goes through Christianity, especially Protestantism, kind of amplified this idea of fallen human nature and a fallen world requiring a whole new creation to replace it. This notion, and frankly, one of the reasons I'm a Muslim is that this never made any sense to me. The idea that a perfect, omniscient, omnipotent God would create a world so flawed, so fallen, so basically wrong, that the only way to redeem that world and to redeem his greatest creation, humanity, that's another dubious element, would be to torture his son to death. I mean, let's face it, that's the basic credo of a certain kind of Christianity. Not all, but it's very central to a certain kind. And to me, that doesn't make any sense. So, I was born a Unitarian, and I'm still a Unitarian. Muslims are just Unitarians with camels. we don't have any use for the fallen world, for the Trinity, or for this notion of redemption through the torture and death of God's Son. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone's religious sensibilities with that, but I believe in truth and laying that line. So that's where I'm going. I think that this notion of a fallen world that needs a whole new creation to replace it is at the heart of the problem that we're experiencing here. Because these post-Christians, much worse than the Christians have all kinds of good things balancing this basic problem. But in post-Christianity, there isn't the love thy neighbor, there isn't the turn the other cheek, there's all sorts of moral balancing things in Christianity that kept it from getting out of hand. Today, in the post-Christian world, this new creation is going to be a technotronic, controlled, robotic society run by high IQ psychopaths. That's where we're going. So it longs for a new creation. It promises redemption, right? We're going to be redeemed through our technology. We're going to take flawed human nature, and we're going to force everybody to be good. We're going to microchip you, we're going to hit you with mind control radiation, and we're going to force you to be good, and that will redeem you. We'll have a perfect world. It'll be heaven on earth, right? Redemption through technocracy or technology. Promises transcendence. We're going to transcend our flawed physical bodies. We're going to transcend this flawed physical world. The same thing as this problematic Christianity, only in technological terms. We're going to transcend it by downloading our psyches into supercomputers, and we'll live forever as electrons flowing through supercomputers. You actually hear a lot of people saying this, these futurists, and there's a whole school of thought in the university campuses today that are extreme techno-utopians, really looking forward to killing their physical bodies and killing their minds, and I would add killing their souls, and then downloading their software into supercomputers and living forever. These people are out of their minds, but they're the ones with the power, they're the ones getting the grants, and they're the ones who are allowing spin-offs and projects that are torturing people at this conference. This religion of technology also offers an eschatology, a map of where we're going towards this redemption. That's very important. And the current eschatology among some of these people is that by about 2045, 2050, which is what, another 30, 40 years, we're going to have the singularity. Computers will get so big, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, artificial life will all converge in this new creation. And everything will be great. Yeah, right. More likely, we'll see about what's more likely to happen. And then finally, there are rites and ceremonies of technology. Let's take these one by one. Okay, the new creation. Well, we have a new creation in the form of a new smartphone every so often. And I think that this has replaced that element of Christianity, looking for a new creation. But what's the new creation really going to be when that singularity comes in 2045? Well, they're telling us that one quite likely possibility is a world of gray goo. How many people have heard that term, gray goo? A few? Sorry? Oh, the black goo is probably a variation on this. But this is one likely outcome of artificial life and nanotechnology. That is, as they release these nano-assemblers that are able to draw on their environment for energy and replicate themselves, the problem is that you can build things that are far more efficient at drawing energy out of the environment, especially out of carbon-based life form environment, than natural life is. So if you release something that's coded to keep reproducing itself and drawing on energy from the environment, and there are no instructions that limit its replication, it can basically just eat everything, and everything's going to become these little nanobots that have, the gray goo eats everything. Sounds like a science fiction premise, but it's actually, they tell us, the people actually doing this work tell us that it's a fairly likely outcome of the quest for nanotechnology and artificial life. So as far as promising redemption, I kind of went through what that means, but people refuse to think about the dark side of all of this because they've transferred their religious hopes onto the light side that they're imagining. The notion that nature is deeply sinful, as I suggested, is a part of a certain kind of Christian culture, and the kind of hatred of nature, both human nature and the nature of the world around us, does seem to be a part of maybe the unconscious, at least, of the post-Christian culture we're living in. Why are Westerners so driven to rebuild the world, maybe not in their own image, but in the image of the machine? Why are we so driven to pave the earth, right? Why are we so driven to try to transform our environment so much, to air condition everything, to heat everything to exactly room temperature, to live in our devices, right? Rather than living in nature, with people around us acting out of human nature, we've got to do something totally different, right? And we don't even realize this. As Western people from Western culture, we just take all of this for granted. And so many things in our culture are profoundly out of sync with human nature as anthropology understands it. Just to throw out a couple of examples, anthropologists tell us that more than 90% of known cultures are polygamous. That is, a man can have more than one wife. 7% are monogamous, as this culture basically is. And 3% are polyandrous. They allow women to have more than one husband. Okay? So the dominant pattern for human nature is polygamy, right? But in the United States today, the Supreme Court has said that essentially everyone has to accept gay monogamous marriage, but the Muslim religious minority is being blatantly discriminated against because some members of that minority, not all, feel that polygamy is allowable under some circumstances. And yet, there is no way that the United States government will ever enact laws even remotely close to being in line with human nature in this area, as it's been demonstrated by anthropology. And we never even question these things because we're swimming in the sea of our own culture. So this is a culture that is profoundly out of sync with human nature that doesn't even realize it. The eschatology here is that we're going to get to techno-paradise, that wonderful state where we've transcended the body, rebuilt the physical world into something totally different from what it is now, maybe completely eliminated it. We'll just be living in supercomputers, and hey, that's going to be pretty fun, pretty hip. Look at these happy young people in the advertisements heading for techno-paradise with their latest device. The unveiling of the iPhone is one of our regular techno rites and ceremonies, and there are plenty of others that could be cited. And all of this literally blinds us to the dark side of technology, particularly the really dark side. A story that someone comes and tells us that they're building these devices to torture people remotely, and you can't even see them, nobody can prove that they exist, and yet horrendous, psychic, emotional, physical effects are coming out of these devices. Wow, this is a terrifying story. And people are just going to automatically block them off and reject it because they are wearing these blinders. They can't question the basic benevolence of technology and the basic benevolence, or at least lack of extreme malevolence, of the technocratic priesthood that runs it. Here's an ad from an old American magazine. This woman is wearing blinders because she shies away from new ideas, so she's wearing horse blinders. This was back when people knew what horse blinders were. And she's so blinded that by her attachment to old things and her inability to adopt to new technologies that she doesn't want a new refrigerator. We've been hearing that same message now for a long time. This ad is probably, 80, 60, 70, 80 years old. The same message in different forms is still hitting us every day, in every way, from every side. So it's kind of a see no evil situation, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil of technology. And you can't tell a story about real evil coming out of technology, the kind of stories that you people are here to tell. And the media isn't here to cover this. The people we talk to in the street are not flocking to hear this. They're covering their ears like one of these monkeys. And the thing is, if we hear no evil, when evil is there, we might be facilitating it and enabling it. This has been a huge problem in the USA since September 11th, a coup d'etat that was inspired by thinkers who were followers of Leo Strauss, a self-described philosopher of evil. Leo Strauss was the leading student of Carl Schmitt. Carl Schmitt was the #1 Nazi philosopher whose political theory was the basis of the Third Reich. Leo Strauss, his Jewish student and his best student, was even more extremist than Carl Schmitt. So he took his philosophy that was more Nazi than the Nazis, went to the University of Chicago, and trained a whole new school of political thinkers who were then urged to get involved in practical politics and rise to the top. And they did. That's where Bush Jr. got his foreign policy people. They were all Straussian neoconservatives, led by Paul Wolfowitz, very likely one of the intellectual authors of the crimes of September 11th, 2001. When we try to explain this, and it's very much in the open, it's not secret information, you don't need to get access to classified documents to learn these things, people have a very difficult time looking at this information. The idea that our leaders are evil, that they are followers of a self-described philosopher of evil, is too much for them to handle. And likewise, the evil at the heart of the people who are torturing people with electronic weapons is just not something that can penetrate the layers of defenses of folks who have been taught that our leaders are basically good and the evil they do is inadvertent, and likewise our technology and the technocratic priesthood are basically good, and the evil that it does and they do is also inadvertent. And of course, if we may then hear the objection from these people that, well, where's the evidence that this is going on, right? They're not usually willing to listen to it, but sometimes you'll get them at least far enough to get that to that level of the conversation. Is there really any evidence that such weaponry is in fact being developed? And of course there is. Here's a data point, the New York Times story from the early 60s about the Jose Delgado experiments. Jose Delgado was the Spanish electronic mind control expert who, I think he was at Yale, he famously stopped this bull in its tracks as it charged up to him using an electrode implanted in the bull's brain. And then around in the late 70s, around 1980 or so, he was able to do the same thing without an electrode in the bull's brain, using simply external radiation. So that they were already at that point in 1980 of being able to let a bull charge at you, and just as the bull's about to reach you, push a button, and an external source stops the bull screeching to a halt in his tracks. That was 1980. Another data point here that we could use to convince people that there is something to look at is the microwave bombardment of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. This was a bit of a scandal. Around the same time as Delgado's remote bull-stopping experiments were revealed, around 1980, there were all sorts of health problems associated with this microwave bombardment. We still don't know why it was being done, or at least officially no one really knows. But this was well documented. It made the media at the time, and it can be shown to people to convince them that here's the use of a remote weapon that's been fully documented by history. And it makes sense that this development of this kind of weaponry would continue. It's simply logical and commonsensical. In all history, the development of weaponry has forged ahead. We really don't know of any examples yet where any group has consciously chosen not to use a weapon, completely for the long term. There have been cases of people stopping at the use of a certain weapon in a certain period or a certain war. For example, some argue that the Chinese could have weaponized gunpowder much earlier than they actually did. It was discovered maybe 1,200 years ago, and it didn't really get weaponized, start to get weaponized until maybe 1,000 years ago. So there are about 200 years maybe where the Chinese might have been sort of half-consciously avoiding weaponizing gunpowder. Likewise, we've had we've had nuclear weapons being used only in very low level of use, used twice to huge effect in 1945. And today, there are people in the military intelligence community who will tell you that there are miniature nuclear weapons still being used occasionally. Most recently in Yemen, there is some evidence of a miniature nuclear bomb being used in Yemen, photographed by cell phones which capture the radiation patterns characteristic of nuclear weapons. And so it's regarded at Veterans Day, where I work, as well established that Saudi Arabia has dropped Israeli nuclear weapons on Yemen just in the last month and a half. But the bottom line here is, and of course, and this is the result of the Paul Wolfowitz doctrine, that's what's the use of nuclear weapons if you can't use them? Right? This is a neoconservative article of faith that we need to change our nuclear policy in the United States so that nuclear weapons can be used. So the miniaturization of them and the development of nuclear weapons technology so it can be used is a prime directive of the leadership in the United States that's been in place since the coup on September 11, 2001. Well, given that this overall tendency towards forging ahead and using all weapons technology that is available suggests, when we look at Jose Delgado, we look at the microwave bombardment of the U.S. Embassy, and we look at some of the other information that's available, obviously they're doing it. You would have to be crazy to not think that they're doing it. And yet, we're the ones that are called crazy for even pointing out this obvious fact. And when you tell people that targeted individuals are, at least in some cases, telling the truth, and would have to be, just using simple logic, common sense, and basic simple facts of history that I've just cited, there's tremendous resistance, again, due to this idolatry of technology and the technocracy. Seth Farber is actually he's a psychiatrist, he's not a psychologist, I got that label wrong, and he's just recently discovered this. He has been a bit of an outcast in the psychiatric profession for some time due to his being careful about, or his being recalcitrant, I should say, when he's being asked to medicate people with very, very dangerous medications that don't work, which is how the psychiatric profession operates in the United States. And he actually tries to help people rather than hurt them with harmful and expensive medications. So that now he's discovered that there are targeted individuals who are telling the truth. And I recently interviewed him on my radio show. That was over a year ago, I guess. And it's certainly a frightening field. But we do have at least one psychiatrist in the United States who's willing to deal with this. Now, this level of evil that's partly maybe built into the technology and partly built into the technocratic priesthood that runs it, a priesthood that, of course, is the function of a struggle for power. And isn't it natural that the people who struggle for power and get to the high positions are the ruthless people who want power? Isn't it even likely that psychopathy, a well-known syndrome, which complete amorality and a lack of compassion and empathy is a dominant feature of personality, would actually be an aid to people who want to rise to these high positions? Wouldn't it make sense that in politics, where lying is so important, a person who can lie as easily as they breathe, as psychopaths can, would tend to rise to the top? In the military, wouldn't it make sense that people who can kill as easily as they can swat a fly would be the people who would rise to the top, since the military is all about killing? I think we clearly have a pathocracy in our current political arrangements, and that means that our technocratic priesthood is actually, in a sense, not just dystopian, but satanic. There's an actual kind of evil here. And again, that's the evil that people can't see because of this idolatry. It's built into the Faustian aspect of our culture, post-Enlightenment. We've all become Faustians in a sense, right? Faust being the figure of the magician who invokes the devil to gain worldly power. And this satanic aspect of technology is giving some people worldly power. In fact, they are hoping to get more than you could almost dream of. You know, a totally controlled robotic world with a handful of people at the top pushing everybody's buttons. Boy, talk about a dream of power. And this kind of satanic power lust is the archetype of Satan, the archetype of evil in monotheism in Western culture. It has a couple of aspects. That Faustian aspect of just going for worldly power, and then also this persecutor archetype that is based on the idea of the word devil or diabolos comes from the word actually for prosecutor. The prosecutor and persecutor also have the same root, and that's the person who's your enemy, who's trying to put you in jail or what have you, or do something bad to you. It's a persecutor. Well, the people who are playing with this technology are clearly actually embodying this archetype of the persecutor, the one seeking an innocent scapegoat or victim and harming them. René Girard, one of our greatest religious thinkers, he's a Christian of French origin who teaches at Stanford, I think he's retired now, has talked about the way this persecutor archetype actually functions in human culture. It's very central to human culture. It shouldn't be surprising to us that there are people who actually kind of take pleasure in persecuting other people. He says it's a built-in function of groups that, he says all culture is built on a murder and a lie. He says that cultures are brought together by scapegoating a targeted individual who always has to be innocent, he says. And ultimately that individual is then sacrificed. So culture is built on scapegoating and human sacrifice, according to René Girard. And of course the political version of this is Carl Schmitt's idea that politics is built on scapegoating an external or internal enemy, right? The way Hitler brought the nation together by scapegoating Jews, Slavs, communists, right? The way the neoconservatives have brought the world together by scapegoating Muslims, that this is just a basic drive in humanity. And it's evil, and we don't want to see it. But hey, there it is. Maybe we're better off seeing it so we can deal with it. So, I'm going to end this talk by suggesting that there may be a sense in which the way forward here is turning back to recuperate some things that we may have lost. Okay, the Zen statement is, before I studied Zen for 30 years, I saw mountains as mountains and rivers as rivers. When I arrived at more intimate knowledge, I came to the point where I saw that mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. But now that I have got its very substance, I am at rest. For it's just that I see mountains once again as mountains and rivers once again as rivers. Now, I wonder if the post-Enlightenment West, which has seen that God is not God, and the faith that built Western culture is hollow, and we've tried to jettison it, we may have to go back and recuperate the part of religion that we can't do without. And that would include the part that tells us that we are souls. We're consciousness having a physical experience. We're not just robotic bodies with neurons firing that completely determine everything that we do. As much as the controllers would like to think we are, we're not. We're something more than that. That this eternal life that comes from the realization that consciousness, not space-time and physical matter, is the basis of existence, will be necessary perhaps for us not to always be manipulated by fear of death. Because that's, of course, how they keep us in line. If we step too far out of line, we'll lose our jobs, we won't be able to sustain ourselves. Maybe they'll even come after us, maybe they'll even kill us with our cell phone, targeting our heart, giving us a heart attack with our cell phone. If we are terrified of what power can do to us, it's going to be harder to act well in the world, calmly and intelligently and appropriately and strategically, but also from a place of inner peace and goodness. That's what it's going to take to actually change anything. So the part of religion that helped us understand that eternity is very important. The way we live our lives is really mainly important in terms of what's going to happen to our consciousness when we step out of this physical existence into eternity. That's very important. Without that, what kind of world do we have? And not only that, it's true. The religious perspective on this is true. Even quantum physics today is suggesting that something like that has to be true. So I'm going to leave you with that. Our false religion of technocratic idolatry that's led us into so many problems, including this problem of informing the world about the worst aspects of experimentation with horrendous mind control weaponry, electromagnetic weaponry. These problems, perhaps in the long run, require a spiritual solution. as well as a political solution. And I hope that all of you will join me in being a part of that spiritual and political solution. And thank you for having the courage to come here and testify about this critically important subject. Okay, I'll begin with a question. How many people here already know everything I'm going to say?
I do.
Okay. I was hoping that the agent with the earpiece that's in contact with the people who profile me would speak up. This actually, when referring to an old joke, this comes from the Islamic world. There's a character, his different names. We call it Juha, is one of his names. Juha is invited to give the khutbah, or the sermon, at the Friday prayer. So he began by saying, how many people here already know everything I'm going to say? And of course, nobody raised their hand. And he said, well, what's the point of talking to such an ignorant bunch of people? And he turned and walked away. So they said, well, they invited him to come back next week. And he said, okay, we figured out this thing. So he comes back the next week and he says, how many people here already know everything I'm going to say? And this time, they all raise their hands. And he says, well, what's the use of telling you then? You already know. He walks away. So they invite him to come back the third week. And this time, they know they're going to get it. So he says, okay, how many people here already know everything I'm going to say? And half the people say, well, we know. Half of us know, and the other half don't know. So he says, well, half who know, go ahead and tell the other half who don't. So that's kind of what I could already do here, because it seems to me actually that more than half of the people here pretty much know this topic better than I do in this respect. So I guess I'll just give you the lecture entitled, What Do I Know? What do I know about mind control and covert harassment? Not very much. I may have experienced covert harassment a couple of times. Twice I had strange experiences in which I got what felt like a pulse of electricity. Once, as a twin-engine jet plane was flying too low and too slow overhead at my place out in the country. That was shortly after I had gotten Barbara Boxer, a leading American senator, to admit that she knew that 9/11 was an inside job, in so many words, on the radio, on a major public radio station. So, and I had witnesses who saw that my dog was nearly killed afterwards by that same whatever it was, and that I had a full body sunburn with no exposure to the sun. And then the other time it was a similar experience. So that's about all I really know about the covert harassment. And as far as mind control goes, though, I think I do understand mind control better than most people do. And that's because I've studied carefully a couple of cases, case studies in mass mind control. And I'll start with the first one that I became aware of was the JFK assassination. That happened when I was 4 years old. There are two people in the United States, no, that's right, there were three people. Three people in the United States who didn't remember where they were when President Kennedy was assassinated. Those three people were Richard Nixon, who was in Dallas that day, but he claimed he didn't remember where he was. George H.W. Bush, who was in Dallas that day, but later claimed he didn't remember where he had been that day. And then finally, E. Howard Hunt, the CIA officer who confessed to his son in a deathbed confession that he had helped perpetrate the JFK assassination on behalf of the CIA. But throughout his life, he insisted that he didn't remember where he was that day. He thought he'd been home with his family. Of course, the problem was his family knew that he hadn't been home. Well, I remember where I was. I was only 4 years old. And I was at my family's house in McFarland, Wisconsin. I remember my mother crying. I remember she seemed so upset it made me upset. I remember she put me upstairs to take a nap. And I remember, as I was taking that nap, a terrible, weird tinnitus, what I would now call tinnitus, buzzing noise was going on in my head. And I remember even at that time remembering that it was like what I heard from high power lines. Okay, so just for what that's worth. In any case, the JFK assassination was a coup d'etat. It was also a mind control operation. And most people don't think of it that way. In fact, when I lectured on 9/11 not too many years ago, I would say 9/11 was different from the JFK assassination because the JFK assassination was merely designed to remove a president and insert another president, to change leadership. It was a regime change operation. Whereas 9/11 was primarily a mind control operation designed mainly to affect people's brains, minds, nervous system, consciousness, and change policies that way, right? But actually, the JFK assassination was also a mind control operation in a sense. Not only because it very likely involved individuals who may have been mind controlled, but because it was designed in part to send a message. Send a message to any future American president, to send a message to the American people, and the people of the world. And that message was, you can't do anything. We're in charge. We run the show. And when they sent Jack Ruby, his real name was Rubenstein, he was a mafiosi, a former hitman in Chicago, and he was the liaison between organized crime and the Dallas Police Department. When they sent that man through a sea of Dallas police officers who all stepped aside as the mafia hitman, Jack Rubenstein, walked through those officers with his gun drawn. They did nothing to stop him. This was on live national television. And Rubenstein, the mafia hitman, walked right up to the alleged lone assassin of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, and shot him dead live on national television. That drove home the message. If you will accept this, if you will accept Jack Rubenstein's claim that he did this to save the poor widowed Jackie Kennedy the pain of a trial, you will accept anything. So it was a mind control operation designed to create inculcated helplessness, learned helplessness in the whole population, and of course in any future U.S. president who might imagine he was president. I'll save a few minutes for questions afterwards, if that's okay. So, fast forward to the case that I studied most, the coup d'etat of September 11, 2001. Like the John F. Kennedy assassination, this was a coup d'etat, but it wasn't so much about changing the actual people in the leadership. Yes, there was some change. There were, I'm told, my sources at Veterans Today tell me that 100 or more patriotic Americans in the military intelligence services have been killed due to their opposition or their presumed opposition to the 9/11 coup d'etat. But that wasn't the main objective. It mainly changed policy by changing people's minds, by changing consciousness. It changed the consciousness of the whole world. It gave, according to research cited by psychologist Martha Stout, half of the American people, nearly half of the American people, clinical post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which is normally something that's only experienced by military veterans who've had horrific experiences in wartime and other people who've had really horrific experiences. I imagine there are probably people here who have symptoms of PTSD from some of these experiences. But it's not the kind of experiences one would normally get from looking at a television screen, from watching network television. But they didn't. They put up images on television that could create clinical PTSD in half the American people. Wow, now that is mind control. So in a sense, 9/11 was the biggest mind control event, in fact the biggest single event influencing the human nervous system that's ever happened on Earth. Some would argue that the crucifixion and the story of the crucifixion of Jesus actually maybe it had more effect over 2,000 years, but 9/11 had its effect very quickly. So in a very short period of time there was this immense impact, this powerful mind control punch. Totally overthrew the American Constitution, totally changed the policies of the empire that dominates the planet, turned it into what shall we call it, an ultra-militaristic, ultra-fascist empire in which no longer were there any constitutional safeguards or any other kind of safeguards, and set it towards a planned planetary conquest on behalf of a state, slave state, to be run by international bankers and their hired technologists. That's what it was. And it worked partly, it's what we would call trauma-based mind control. You traumatize people badly enough, that's the way to try to get them under control. More specifically, it was an example of coercion, which is discussed by Douglas Rushkoff in his book with that same title. Coercion, Rushkoff tells us, is the basic mind control process, and it consists of 3 steps. The first step is to disorient the target. That is, break the target loose from their normal moorings in space and time and in their normal sense of self in reality. You may have experienced something like this. Gaslighting, this can be done. CIA interrogators do this. They break the person down through torture and mental torture. But even car salesmen sometimes do this. The car salesman take you for a ride in the car, and you're driving, you're test driving the car, and at just the right moment, the car salesman sort of taps you on the shoulder and says, "Is this the kind of car you can see yourself driving?" And for a split second, your eyes glaze over as you try to imagine yourself driving the car that you're actually driving. It breaks down your sense of sitting there in reality driving the car. At that split second, when your eyes glaze over, the car salesmen know that there's a slightly higher than usual chance of an accident. But they also know that that's the time that they step in with step number 2 in the coercion process, which is to regress you to a childlike state. And so they kind of say, "Oh, I can see you love this shiny new toy car. Good. Well, now Johnny, drive back to the dealership." And so you do. Then they come in here. You take your coffee black, and they just give you the coffee. They don't ask whether you want coffee. And even if you're not a coffee drinker, you'll probably start drinking it. So they regress you down to this childlike state. And then they stepped in as the third step, which is they become your substitute parent figure. Now, you're this helpless little child, doesn't know where they are, and here's this voice of authority, this parental voice that just takes you over. And before you know it, you just walk out of that dealership, and you own this car that you never even intended to buy, and you don't even know why you bought it. Okay? That's coercion. The car salesmen do it, the CIA torturers do it, the corporations do it. This is why they build shopping malls and stores, precisely to confuse you, in order to break you down, and then they're coming at you with these ads that infantilize you, make you like a little kid that wants all the shiny stuff. They consciously do this. People who design stores and shopping malls purposely, they'll change the stuff all around all the time, and they'll purposely make it really confusing to do this. There's actually a name for this. It's called the Gruen transfer, after the man named Gruen who discovered it. The Gruen transfer is that moment where you've lost your sense of self in reality, and you're vulnerable to being regressed to a childlike state and taken over by a substitute parent figure. Okay, and that's what happened on September 11, 2001. People's sense of reality was broken down. And just like, is this the car you can see yourself driving? It was like, wow, is this a disaster movie? And then, this is very real. Perhaps as many as 50,000 Americans have been killed. And, oh my God, it's like, but it looks like a disaster movie. But we're being told the truth. Oh, is it real? Is it a disaster movie? Emotions torn apart. And this is how they got half the American people with PTSD. They tore them down. And then, of course, the voice of authority moved in. And the substitute parent figures, right up to and including the POTUS or President of the United States, started chanting in unison, Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor, and Bin Laden, radical Muslims, and crazy. Everybody was hypnotized. That was quite the mind control operation. Okay, almost there. Okay, let's fast forward to what now, in a sense, is another sense, the biggest mind control operation ever. The Charlie Hebdo events of last January 7th, the subject of this new book, possibly the greatest pushback against mind control yet. We are not Charlie Hebdo. 9/11 may have completely changed the consciousness of the planet. It's even registered on these random number generators that measure consciousness and so on. But Charlie Hebdo got 4 million people into the streets, marching like lemmings, with exactly the same sign, exactly the same font, saying exactly the same thing. Je suis Charlie. There were 4 million Charlies in this house. Je suis Charlie. I am Charlie. I am a pornographic blasphemer who puts out horrific, disgusting pornographic pictures of the Pope, of Prophet Muhammad, and other revered religious figures. That's what they're all saying. Wow. How did that work? Well, long story short here is the usual coercion process was used. The French people were traumatized with these images and so on. Frankly, though, I have to wonder whether there wasn't some kind of technological help here. You know, I'm told by veterans today, colleagues, including Gordon Duff, senior editor, who's former member of an intelligence service, that if I named, they would have to kill me. It was the CIA. Just kidding. He says that yes, they're using subliminals. Everybody who has a cell phone has been bombarded with subliminals since 9/11. I don't know. But all I know is that getting 4 million people into the streets with the same sign, the same font, after this operation that was so botched. I mean, 22 leading public intellectuals in this book, 16 are saying this was a false flag, and the evidence for that is overwhelming and abundant, just like with 9/11. But what's new here is that within just 3 months of the event, we had these eminent people saying that this was a false flag. And then the other 6 who don't go into the false flag aspect, tearing down the propaganda from other directions. So, honestly, I think this book deconstructs, takes apart both the war on terror, which is really this guy's war on Islam, and the science of mind control through false flag operations, maybe better, in a more comprehensive way than any other publication yet. Thanks not so much to me, I was just the editor and one of the contributors, but to the other 21 contributors who have together they've gathered together this series of prisms through which to look at this event that overall, I think, provides a better look at it, even though it was rushed out in 3 months, than any look yet at any false flag operation. So that's my pitch for this book, and I do hope you'll check it out and think about what we can learn about mind control through the study of false flag operations, because along with the kind of stuff that this conference is about, false flag operations are the most powerful mind control tool in the hands of the unscrupulous psychopaths who rule this empire. Thank you very much. I don't have time for questions.